A while ago, I did a video that some customers had written me and they said, why don't you do a video and you just breed an egg layer fish you're not all that familiar with, and you know how you would go about it and see how you do, because that's how most customers will be when they first try to breed something. So I used the Odessa Barbs, even though I've been breeding them before, but I did it in such a way that I hoped would be very easy for most people to try to do. The result was I wasn't happy with it. I finished it and I realized I had a lot more work to do. I didn't know it at the time, but I was getting ammonia chloride in my tap water from de-icing chemicals here in Denver, which happens in the wintertime. This boosts your ammonia levels in your water and will certainly make it difficult to breed fish and to keep a lot of fish. A lot of people here set up 1 gallon bottles throughout their fish room, to containers. They fill them up and let the water degas for a couple days before they use them with water changes. But in the time that I finished that last video on breeding the Odessa Barbs with that simple method I set up, I just said, oh man, I got to fix this. And if I can find a better way, because I was having problems with the way that I was breeding the Odessas regularly, covered in the first video. Not that it was, an issue. I was breeding them pretty dependably for 8 years, but there were things about the divider method I didn't like, and I wanted to improve upon. So anyway, the original way that these were bred, now this is a 20 breeder. The video when I bred it, breeding Odessa Barbs, videos 1, 2, 3, selectaquatics.com, I used a 29 tall. The 29 tall and the 20 breeder use the same footprint, so they're the same size on the bottom. The 29 tall, of course, is bigger, so you can raise more fry up in it. But these have worked fine for doing the breeding, so I've gone to pretty much using these. The fish can be netted out and sent off to their own tanks within a month. So generally what you need is a tank big enough to raise them up to the point where they reach a month old. And so these do that job. Now this is the original divider. This is the divider in that original video. This has been used many, many dozens of times to breed Odessa Barbs. And the way that I'd always done it in the past, you put this sucker in here, like this, and it'll get held in place. And then you have these strips on the side that tell you about where the divider should be. And that's a little bit high. I probably would not breed quite that much. I only have about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of water below this. And you, of course, can tighten it up easily enough with more Scotch scrubby pads. Now, everything I'm doing here are made with a few very common substances that you will want to become familiar with. These have some kind of a name. It comes in 3-foot by 4-foot sheets. You can get it at Home Depot. You usually go up and ask for light diffuser material, or even say honeycomb light diffusing material, and they'll generally find it. I have been in stores many times when I'm trying to describe this to them and they don't know what I'm talking about and tell me they don't have it, and in fact they do. But this used for tops, and used for dividers, used for a zillion things in a fish room, and they can be broken up with a pair of pliers, needle nose pliers. They're real easy to work with. So that's the main thing for a lot of these dividers and such. Then, of course, our friend the Scotch Scrubbies can have enough of these guys in a fish room. Electrical ties. And so what we have is that white material. On top of the white material is this green stuff. This is cross-stitch backing. You can buy it for 50 cents a sheet at any home hobby store. For those of you who don't know what a cross-stitch is, I'll explain it here in a moment. Anyway, so you would you get the cross-stitch backing, and that then can be put in with the electrical ties attached to this. And you measure it out so that it fits the tank. These are more electrical ties that I put through the little loops here, so I can move this around and move it back and forth very easily. So the problem I had with this is that you've got this space set up at the bottom where the fry, the eggs will fall, and the fry will grow up then below the divider. I put the adults in here for about 3 or 4 days. This is how I did it in the past. And then would remove the adults. I would leave the divider in for another 3 days until the young hatched and came up above the divider. Then I would pull this out all the time, feeding 3 times a day with vinegar eels, and doing 50% water changes following each feeding to keep the water clean. That, like I said, worked fairly well. But there was a couple things I was never happy with. The fact that I couldn't keep this area beneath the divider cleaner than I would like. When I did it with, I use a duckweed starter when I do all my breeding of the egg layers. In other words, I have dried duckweed that I keep here that I take out of other tanks. And then I'll use that as an infusoria starter. So that'll get sprinkled onto the water in the tank, which would be very, filled very low when you're about to do a batch. And infusoria then will bloom from that dried duckweed in 7 days. So you have 7 days then to get everything ready to go before the adults are introduced. So you've got that in the water, which makes it kind of dirty to begin with. And you have this area you can't get to, you can't clean it. And of course it doesn't happen very often, and I haven't had it happen to me in years, but at first when I first made this, I had it happen often because I was choosing fish that were too small or whatever. They would get under the divider. So you've got all these adults swimming around on top, you've got maybe some new eggs and some new young below, and then you see an adult swimming along under the divider, of course, just munching down on eggs and new fry. So, you want to avoid that. So I had to find a way to go ahead and I wanted a nice clean way where the fish could breed, take the divider out without taking any eggs and fry with it, and be able to keep the environment clean for breeding. So I have a friend who's at a commercial facility down in Texas, and so he said, well, what we do here is we use baskets. So we put a basket in, then we put marbles in the basket, and then the fish lay their eggs and such, and they fall through the marbles, and then once they're done spawning, we just lift out the basket, and voila, and all that leaves in the tank are the young and the fry. I thought, that sounds like a great idea. So I made these baskets. And so put them in the tank, and then I would put marbles in here, and then I would have a sponge filter over here, or air stones going because I was doing really heavy water changes. But man, the fish got so chewed up. The males chasing the females, they would rub up against all this plastic stuff, and it would just tear them up. And I lost fish. I lost both males and females with that. I tried it about 4 times with this basket actually, and I ended up losing about, oh my goodness, about a half dozen fish that just got themselves all chewed up. So I said, okay, that isn't going to work. So I took the sides off, and then put the Scotch guard, the Scotch scrubby stuff around it, and then I started laying down a sheet, cut this stuff to give a little bit of distance when I put these in. And I thought, well, that would be kind of great because now the eggs and the young are down below and they're swimming around nice and fine. The problem is the adults, because they've got nothing else to do, would get underneath it. And getting underneath it was not a problem for them. So this went back to the drawing board. So I said, okay, I need something that's comfortable, forms a space below where the eggs are laid, but that can be very comfortably and easily revealed and opened up without damaging a lot of fry and eggs in the process. So I came up with this. Now with this, what this is, it's simply a sheet of the white plastic stuff. I cut the middle of it out. Then I cut another sheet of the white plastic stuff, and I laid it on top, and I cut its inside out, so that now, when I put this down on the ground, the distance from here to here is 2 thicknesses, which gives me enough room for the eggs and fry to fall down, and this area is left open so water can rush through. I tried doing it by leaving the white material in the middle, but what you ended up then was all the eggs in the fry were in their own each little square, and the water quality wasn't good. It didn't go through, it didn't keep things clean. So I took this bottom out, and then all of a sudden that made things work really well. So what I wanted now was, when that's in and I have this gap, I wanted to have some kind of a top that could be moved really easily. So what I did was I made up these. More of the white material, scrubbies, electrical ties, and you just lay it in on top. And that fits really nice. Now when you put water in there, these will tend to float a little bit. So I have this piece of petrified wood I've had for like 40 years, and put another stone on there, and that holds them down, and the fish don't scrape up against those. They don't seem to bother themselves against the rocks. On top of that then will go Java fern. I cut a piece of foam, that fits right in here. And what this does is it keeps the adults from swimming down under the plates. It keeps them out. Then I got a hold of one of these sponge filters. I cut about half of it off so that now it's a much lower stature. There's a little dealer that goes in there. And the net goes in right here. Get it nice and snug up against the glass. Then this line on the side, when you fill the water in here up to that, that allows this to go ahead and work so that it filters really well. As opposed to if it was much higher. You want the water level to be low because you have air bladder issues with the new fry if you don't raise them in a very small amount of water, a relatively small amount of water. No less than 2 inches, but no more than 4 certainly. So I had a couple batches go like that. Things were going okay, but I still had a problem in that I'm pulling out the females as they drop their eggs. So let's say I put in, my usual batch I put in is 4 males and 6 females. So I put them in, and then I start watching. By the first day they're all skitzed out. It's always the case. By the second morning you'll start seeing some chasing going on around. By the third morning is when they're breeding seriously. They'll start the night before and they'll go through that. And oftentimes, if the breeding went well and everything's comfortable for them, it's after that third morning that I would pull them out. But oftentimes I'll look at the females and I'll see that of the 6, there's still maybe 3 or 4 that haven't dropped their eggs. Now there will be some that will not, no matter what you do. But you know, you kind of want to watch them and make sure you don't pull them too early. So I was like, how can I get them to where they'll breed right when they're put together? So what I did then was I realized the females are the ones that are the most skitched. And my experience has always been that if you want breeding to go successfully, the females have to be comfortable. The males, when they're added to the tank, will breed no matter what. But the females, if they're not comfortable in the tank and they don't feel like they already have some ownership, they know where the places to hide are, yada, 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 then you're not going to get breeding. So since I put the duckweed into these tanks with about 2 inches of water, and then I don't put the adults in until the 5th day, so that by the 7th day, when the eggs start to hatch, the young will have infusoria to feed on, I decided to put the females into the tank on day 3. So the females go into the tank on day 3, 2 days before the males are introduced. And again, as I mentioned, I'll have Java fern here. So that works out great. With 2 days, the females are comfortable. They feel adjusted and adapted to the tank. And then when you put the males in, their breeding will take place almost always within 48 hours and often within 24. Whereas before I was going 4 and 5 days. Because the females, you know, being uncomfortable and being skitzed and all that, the last thing you need to do is put a bunch of males in that are just going to chase them around and make life difficult. So that allowed me to get a larger number of eggs at one time and to get the adults out before they did any damage to the eggs or fry. So this is the new setup. We're going to go ahead now and we're going to start a batch and run a batch through till they're a month old, and so you can see them grow up in this new setup. So harvesting the eggs, getting the young to hatch, you're really only about a third the way there. It's a lot harder to raise the fry up for many of these fish than it is to breed them in the first place. What I'll do now is cover what happens when you get fry. Now, when I first started doing this, I would feed the fry as I knew they were hatching, which was the day after being laid. But the females can lay over a period of 3 days, and so you have young hatching while there's active egg laying going on from other females in the same tank. So what I started doing early on was I would start feeding vinegar eels on the morning of the second day that they were introduced. So I'd put them together, let's say one day, and then the following morning I would go ahead and I would do a light feeding of vinegar eels just to go ahead and cover for anything that was to hatch over that period of that day. Sometimes I may, if I look at them and they're not doing well, they're skitsy and they're not breeding yet, then I may wait an extra day, but I definitely don't wait any longer than to the second day to add vinegar eels. And of course, once you start adding vinegar eels, then you have to start doing the big water changes, the 50% water changes. Now the way that so the vinegar eels are here. Now I have about 30 bottles of these downstairs. It's got a good culture in it, quite thick there with vinegar eels. Very easy to maintain, very easy to keep going. They're not an eel at all, they're a nematode. A bottle like that lasts for about 5 months. They don't need to be fed, don't need to be kept at all. There's no maintenance at all except to keep them at room temperature and basically out of the light, don't let them get too warm, but they're fine. So I've been using vinegar eels for my Odessa Barbs forever. One thing I did start doing is I started raising paramecium. Paramecium aren't that difficult, they really aren't. But I will tell you something interesting. With the paramecium, with the vinegar eels, when you feed the vinegar eels, if you want to see how many young there are that are hatching, you'll see it then. Because the young, they love the vinegar eels. I mean, it just gets them going. They just come up and you put the vinegar eels in and it's just a flurry of activity. You put the paramecium in and for some reason, I know they eat it, and you look back on them and you'll see that their bellies are full, but there's just very little reaction. So I know that for them, vinegar eels is more like candy than the paramecium are. But the point of my introducing the paramecium was to try to keep my water quality better. And you have apples in the vinegar eels down on the bottom, and they deteriorate, and there's a fiber that will get up into the water. And over time, you end up getting it into the aquarium, and what happens can be seen well in that egg layer for live bearer keepers video that I mentioned, where that got out of control and I didn't have control over it. So I was determined to get that beat. So I've been using the paramecium like for the afternoon feedings, and I feed the vinegar eels in the morning and the night, and that has helped a lot, and it's also helped bring it down. But you can certainly do this without the paramecium if it's not something you've kept before, and I understand that paramecium is not something most people keep. One thing also that helps a lot is the Sarah Micron food. You can actually use this as the afternoon feeding with vinegar eels in the morning and night. It's an extremely small particulate food, basically spirulina based, lots of vitamins, all that good stuff. And the fish do like it and they do eat it. The way to get the water out of the tank to do water changes, let's say you fed the fish and you have to get the water out of the tank and you don't want to suck up any fry, which are microscopic. If you just stuck a hose in there, then you'd have no fry left in no time. So what I did was I find the finest net breeder I could find, and then I make sure to take it out of the tank between each water change and put it in when the water change is done, and then I use the hose in the breeder to take the water out of the tank. And that way I then suck up very few fry. All right, so we're going down and get this started. The 20 gallon to breed the Odessas in is right here on the left, and then we'll do our water changes, taking them from these tanks here on the right up high. These guys are on central sump, and so we'll just keep the water levels here filled up, and then we'll use that water to do the water changes in our Odessa tank. So the first thing we need to do is simply to fill it up for 2 inches and then put some duckweed into it. So here's the tank now with a couple inches of seasoned water added to it. You can see I brought it up there to that first orange piece of tape. And so now I'm going to add the duckweed. All it takes is a couple of tablespoons, not very much. We'll let that a little bit more. Okay, we'll let that fester away. And then the next thing will be to add the females in on day 3. Okay, this is the tank at day 3, and it looks just about how you'd expect it to look. The duckweed is broken down, the water is slightly cloudy, just has a slightest tint of cloudiness to it, and you do not want to add fish to that water. That's basically just dirty water that's had duckweed in it that's gone bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a 50% well. What we'll do is we'll bring our water level up to about here, take a look at it, and see how, if there's any cloudiness still in there, and then put the bottom in, and then put the setup together. If it turns out that the water is not quite as clean as I would like it to be, then we'll bring it up just slightly higher. But we'll basically put it together and then put the females in and give them 2 days to adjust to the tank before we introduce the males. So here's the tank a little later that day. I had filled the water up. I wanted to see how much debris was in there and how it would spread out, how it would affect the water. And it is a little on the cloudy, just a touch on the cloudy side, but the amount of debris is probably just about right. So it's a little cloudier than I would like to have the females go immediately into. And of course, this is all about building infusoria, so you don't want to just pull the water out that's got the infusoria in it. So I'm usually fairly careful about how much water I'll remove at this time to maintain as much of the rich organics in the water that are there. But we'll go ahead and put the base in and put the bottom together and see how the water level works out and how it looks, and then adjust at that point. So now that the base is laid in, we'll go ahead and put together the other side. With the sponge and the sponge filter laid in place, the water level is right about here, so you can see that works out, that the sponge filter is just at about the right height, where its filtration is not too heavily compromised. I might bring the water level up another inch or two, so that the females are comfortable when they're in there by themselves and the actual breeding is not taking place. The sponge is there because it keeps the adults from going underneath and below the bottom plates. I had first wondered about this business and how I was going to deal with this. So what I did the last couple times was I went ahead and I just moved the sponge filter over against this. It's no problem for the adults to go back here behind the sponge. It's when they get on this side of the sponge and they go up under the plates that you have trouble. So we can go ahead and just leave it set like that, and it keeps the adults out. So the first 2 plates have been laid in. When you look over the top and you see how they fit, everything fits fairly snug, but like for instance here, there are some spots. So what we'll do is we're going to go in here later and we'll take strips that we've cut and we'll fit them down in here to take up those spaces so that there is not the opportunity for any of the fish to go down between the plates and the glass and get underneath the plates. And we'll do more of that here in a moment. So here we are, and we've got a strip of the Scotch scrubbies all around the perimeter, nice and fit, so that everything's nice and tight. No adults can get around the plates anywhere. Nice and solid, nice and tight. You've got the sponge filter going back here. We're going to put a second air stone in. You always want to have air on both sides of the tanks. I learned that the hard way. And 3 air stones is too much. But 2 air stones is important, and they should be as far apart across the tank as you can. And with regards to the sponge, if you wonder why I put this ugly yellow-orange sponge here, if I had a white sponge, I would put that there. And the reason is because when the pairs are spawning, they want to go where it's most secluded and most comfortable. And this area here is going to have Java fern over it. And you want them to spawn over this area because that's where the eggs are going to get underneath the plate where the adults can't get to them. So you want to try, if possible, to keep the adults out of this area if you can. Certain females can certainly come over here and hang out if they're feeling like they're being a little stressed, but they generally don't. They're going to go ahead and they're going to stay here where it's dark and it's comfortable and amongst the plants and spawn like they should, and you'll lose very few eggs in the process. So the amount of plants and how they're configured should be a pretty simple thing, but it isn't. You'll see with this setup, when you compare it to the divider setup in the other video, I'm using far fewer plants. I don't have 2 layers of them. I just have 1 layer just for the adults to swim around. The fry don't have Java moss that they're swimming amongst. So when you're putting the plants in, you don't want too much because you can tend to build up that slime and issues with the vinegar eels. But you want to have enough so that there's security and comfort. And to do that, you want to be sure that the fish can swim around whatever plant you put in there. If I was to put a big clump of plants, say, like if I was to just fill this up with plants, I would have one of 2 things happen. All of the fish would go there and would be there and wouldn't spawn and would just hang out in the dense plants right here. Or the fish would never go into the plants because they couldn't get into them. And they'd be swimming out in the open all the time, and again, that would affect your spawning. So this way, the plants are set up not only for seclusion, but also for security for the females. So you want it so the females can dart into a group of plants to avoid the males when they want, and that they can get around and gravitate through the tank really easily, if at all possible. So the tank was filled up to right about here, and then brought back down. Of course, from the time this tank is set up, the only water going into it has been seasoned water coming from another well-established tank. You never want to put raw water in with a new egg layer fry or when I'm doing any breeding. So people have asked me how many females and males to put into a tank to do breeding because they don't want to be knee-deep in fry, and at the same time they want to make sure that the effort's worthwhile. So when I'm doing this, I usually pick about 6 females to 8 females and 4 or 5 males. That seems like a lot, and it is. So I still do 6 and 4, aiming for about 300. And when I get more, great, and I'm usually guaranteed at least that many. If I get a ton more than that, then I have to, scramble a little bit and find tank space. People will write me about breeding fish all the time, and one of the things that many forget is that the fish you produce, how they look, 50% of the responsibility for how they're going to look is going to come down to the females that you choose. So, if you have a fish like these guys where the males and the females look very different from one another, and you're looking to build out really nicely colored males, then just choosing good colored males is not going to get you there. You're going to need females that come from a line that also have good colored males, because they carry the genetics, of course, for both sexes. It's not that difficult if you were to choose poor quality females and great males to keep coming up with, ugly fish and wonder why. So I pulled a bunch of females here. We should be able to get 5 or 6 out of this bunch. And so what I'm looking for, you can see that most of them have a base reddish body color. Not all have that. When I don't see that in a fish, I will usually call them so that I'm choosing fish with that. I don't know that it's necessarily absolutely a fact, but I'm assuming that a good reddish base color in the females is going to produce nicer redder males. I also look for females with as much orange or red in their anal and dorsal fins as possible. Some of the females can have really nice, strong red anal fins. Let's see if I can zoom in here a little bit and get a better look at some of these females so we can see who looks good and who doesn't. But a female with very poor colored finnage is simply going to produce males that aren't going to have good colored finnage. So right now I'm kind of letting them settle down a little bit because they're still spooked from being pulled from the tank, so the color's a little less than it would normally be. But there's something also that I'm seeing in my females that you can see in this one here against the back. This guy here is black markings in the dorsal fin. Usually I didn't used to see that. And I'm assuming that may infer that I'll get some That female right there also has some nice black in its dorsal fin. But you can see that one also has some nice orange anal fins. So when you're looking for a fish to breed, for instance, these two guys over here, like this one right here, they can be really, really plump and they're ready to go, like this one, but their color isn't good. So, you know, yeah, they're full of eggs, like you can see from here that the anal fin on this fish has almost no red in it. So, you know, that's going to be my last choice as a breeder. Whereas this one here, that one has more red in its anal fin, and it looks to be fairly plump. So, now this is nice. I like that body color, and I like the black in that fins, and it's got tremendous anal fin. See how you can see the red-orange anal fin can be seen from here. So now it comes down to how plump is that female, and she looks good. Cool. That's going to be a breeder we're going to use for this batch. So anyway, I'll get started and get these guys pulled. Now this fish here is like the perfect female. She's starting to lose her color as she's been pulled out of the tank, and she's not really ready to spawn yet. She's not fully gravid. But you can see she's got a few eggs going on, but I'm not going to use her to breed this time around. But this is kind of what I'm looking for. She has great red body color, bright red anal fins, and some markings, some dark color in the dorsal. You can see there's a fair amount of black coloring on her scales. So she's going to produce males with a really nice dark black coloration. And you can see with the amount of red in her that she's also going to produce males with really good red color. So right now she looked 100% better just 5 minutes ago. I'm going to put her back in the tank and let her get back. But this is kind of what you're looking for. And when I see a female like this that's full of eggs, she gets grabbed. And also what you really can't tell very well in this video is that she's a huge fish. She's a really good sized. So I did get 3 others that look very much like her, and I'm going to use those 3 as breeders. So they're now floating to adjust to the temperatures. The group on the left came from the rack on the left in the alcove. The group on the right came from the rack on the right in the alcove. Those 2 racks are not the same temperature. One is kept deliberately a little cooler than the other, which doesn't seem to bother the Odessas when I'm breeding them out. The one rack is at 72 degrees and the other rack is at 75 degrees. So but they have to breed at 77 to 78 degrees. So this tank right now is at 75 degrees. And I have a heater going that's going to bring it up to 77 over the next day, well, next few hours actually. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when you're allowing them to adjust and adapt like this, these are high oxygenation fish. So they don't like being kept in small containers like this for very long. So these guys now have been in here for about 10 minutes. So I'll let them out. And these guys here have been in a little less long, but they should be all right. Let's see what that's. Well, I'm going to let that water average out with one just a little bit further before I let them go. But yeah, the temperature is really important, 77 degrees. Now, when I used to never condition my females for breeding, and that's a mistake. Yes, it's true that when kept well fed and well taken care of, that they'll fill up with eggs naturally and they'll breed, and then you pick out your gravid females. This is true. But if you want to have a far greater selection of females to choose from, then go ahead and hit them with some live and frozen foods for about 2 weeks, your female tank, and you'll get far greater number of females that are ready to spawn when you want to spawn them. It takes about 10 days for them to build up eggs within inside them. They say you can spawn them every 10 days, but I wouldn't do that. But I do definitely hit them. These guys were hit with frozen Daphnia for the last about 2 weeks. We'll go ahead and let them go. Now they'll go ahead and, get accustomed to the tank. The tank is comfortable for them. The water level is comfortable for them, but it's too high for them to breed. We definitely want the water level to be down around in this area when they're breeding, so that the eggs fall right down into the mesh below, And for now, they got the tank to themselves for 2 days, and then the males will go in on day 5. Okay, here we are on day 4. Water stayed pretty clear. There's a couple of the females there. So what I generally do during this time, they're still a little skitsy, as you can see, is I will feed them twice a day of a little bit of dry food. The adjustment and what they're going through certainly takes some energy, so they're usually hungry. And you want them to be well fed so that they don't eat the eggs when they do finally start laying eggs. The males won't go in for another day. This is good. This shows that they're all responding to the food, and I don't see any damage to anybody. Everybody looks good. But I'll feed them once in the morning and then once at night, and I won't do a water change on the tank quite yet. I'll just leave it as it is, and we'll deal with our first 50% water change tomorrow, just before the males are added. Now here we are in the afternoon of the second day together, and this is exactly what you want to see. You can see that they're all out in front. When I come walking up now, they're thinking more of food than of fear. So they're out and about, and when you look at them fairly closely, their color is coming out in them. And it's not that they will get heavily colored when they're breeding. I've seen them breed pretty washed out. I've seen them breed with really brilliant color. I guess it just depends on the batch. But their being colored up does show that they're comfortable. And that's really important. Now this is the next group of young males coming up. Got a little bit of food falling from the surface. That's why they're so agitated. But I'm going to choose my males from here. These guys are only about a year old. And part of the problem I was having before too, I was finding that a lot of the fish I was using as breeders, where here I was thinking they were in their prime, were actually getting a little too old. It's turning out that fish that are 3 to 4 years old are just a little too old to use. Whereas this time around I'm going to go ahead and stick with some younger, more vibrant fish. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and start pulling a couple of males out of this batch. As I mentioned before in previous videos, the thing about this fish, of course, they're so fast, and you know, we can look from here and say, oh, we want that fish, but that's pretty much an impossibility. So what I look for, what I'll do is I'll dip a big net in, leave it in the tank for 5 or 10 minutes, let them adjust to being confined in the soft exterior of the net, and then I'll go in with a small net and a flashlight and start picking out the fish that I'm looking for various traits. I generally look for a really nice deep red stripe with good black markings, and lately I've been really trying to focus on getting a lot of yellow in the dorsal, like on this fish I've got focused on here. So I get a bit of a shot of that one. But they vary quite a bit between them, and so you want to make sure when you're picking fish that you're looking for specific traits and sticking to it. Some of them have really tremendous red, some of them have really nice black. And as I said before, it doesn't help much to just try to pick something from here. We have to get them into the net, and then you want to get them out and get them chosen before they wash out too much, because when you get in there with the flashlight and the net poking around, they'll wash back out again. This line has gotten good over time about holding onto their color when they're being disrupted. But I know when I first got them, you know, any kind of disruption, and they just lost their color immediately. So here we are at day 5, and the females are doing fine. The reason they're not out front, I think, is because the water is beginning to deteriorate after 2 days now since the last water change. The only filtration in there is this airstone movement, and there's a sponge filter in the back corner, but that doesn't provide much filtration. It just keeps my ammonia and nitrate levels to where I don't run into problems. So the fish aren't out and about, but they were looking really good yesterday. They're definitely comfortable in their environment. They were just fed here a few moments ago, so they're kind of hiding in the plants. But I think they're ready to have the males put in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and perk them up. And I'm going to do that by bringing my water level up to, we'll probably bring it up to here. And then I'll drain it back down again to about here. And then I'll introduce the males. And the males are being well fed before they're being put in here, so that I don't have to add much food to this container, or add as little as I need to. And then I won't give them any feeding again until lightly this evening. Now this may just be me, but my experience has been that the females, when they enter a new environment, their whole thing is that they feel as if they're prey. So they want to have the environment prove to them that there's no threats or any reason why they need to be concerned. So they will usually stay, in my experience, when you put them into a new environment like this with a different colored bottom and the water level being low and such, they'll stay spooked for like 2 days. But when you introduce males into an environment like this, they scope it out, and their first thought is, how can I dominate the environment? How can I take over the environment? So they start exploring it to find out if there are any other threats or anything going on. And if they determine that there's not, then they make it work for them. So when you put the males into an environment like this, it only takes them a couple hours to adjust and take over. The females, they want a couple of days to go ahead and make sure that everything is fine and dandy. And so these females, I think, are pretty comfortable in this environment, and they're looking great. The color is good. So we're going to go ahead and get some males and put the males on in here. I want to make sure that they're not washed out from all the disruption when I start looking for them. And as well, you want to make sure that when I'm pulling them out of the net and sorting it, that they don't wash out really quickly. I imagine to some extent I've probably been choosing for males that hold on to their color longest, simply because I've been doing it now for 10 years, where they're all scooped up in the net and they all tend to wash out, and then I'm doing my best guess as to which has the best color. Although today they pretty much hold on to their color for the time I need for them to select and see which ones I'm looking for. So with the first net full here, these guys all look pretty good. You can see that I've been pushing for the green the last couple of generations, and it seems to be showing up finally. So the green is getting nice and strong. So now the issue, you can see that the red's pretty good in all of them. There's one female over there, but the red's pretty good in all of them. A couple are better than others. So what I'm going to do is, the distinguishing factor in this bunch is going to be the amount of black. So I'm going to go through here and pick, I'll probably get out of this group 2 or 3, and I'll be looking for 4 males overall. So I had a breeder friend tell me once, always overpick and force yourself, get like, if you want 4 fish, pick 7 or 8, and then force yourself to take back, to put back the bottom 3 or 4. So in this case, I grabbed quite a few, and most of these are real nice. And I'll go ahead and pull these down to 4 individuals, and then we'll take them over and float them in the tank with the females. So it's about 5 minutes later. Temperatures are between 2 degrees of one another. So I'm going to go ahead and let these guys go. When I talk about being washed out, this is about as washed out as they're going to get. You almost don't even see the red stripe in them any longer. And they just zip into the plants, I assume. Females are going to check them out. But in this case, this is good. The females are letting them know that you've come onto my territory. Who are you? like I say, soon the males will establish their dominance. Some of them are already starting to get their color back. But if we're lucky, we'll see some breeding tomorrow morning, but chances are it'll be the next night before they'll actually start breeding seriously, and then I'll probably pull them the morning following that. If the females are still carrying any eggs, then I may wait until that afternoon or evening to pull them. Okay, there's one last thing I'm going to do, and that's that there's this light overhead. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. And then during these couple of breeding days, I'm going to go ahead and leave the light off. The light will go back on 24/7 actually once the adults are taken out. But this will just add to their feeling of security, particularly during this acclimation period for the males. Okay, today is day 6, and we'll go ahead and put the light on up above. Okay, you can see that they're zipping around in there. So they're doing well. Oh my goodness. Sorry guys. We know that they're doing fine. So, no need to bother them. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead, bring the water level up to here, bring it back down. And then I'm going to add some paramecium just to get some infusoria in the water. And then tonight, before sunset, I'll go ahead and do a feeding of vinegar eels, and then do another 50% change by adding 50% and draining it out. And then we'll look and see how they are tomorrow morning with respect to how thin down the females are. So the water level's been brought up, and then the breeder can just be laid down here right on top of the sponge. The water's siphoned right out from the inside of the breeder down into some buckets below, and the water level then now will be brought down to here, and then I always take the breeder out. I used to leave the breeder in, but I found that I was getting fry sucked in because they get through the net material over the course of the day. So I put it in when I know there's no fry in there, and then do the draining. There we go. So these are the paramecium. You can actually see them here. That's the really, really tiny little white speck dailies going on there. They're not difficult to harvest. They really aren't. I avoided them forever because I thought they were really difficult. I'd heard all kinds of stories about sterilizing this and sterilizing that. And actually they're quite easy to keep. So here's just a little container with the paramecium. I don't know if the camera can get them or not. Maybe you can see that they're in there. Anyway, we're just going to take that. And just sprinkle it around over all the dark area where the eggs are likely laid. And then we'll leave these guys alone until this evening when we give them some vinegar eels. Okay, so this is the evening of the 6th day. The water still looks pretty clear. Things look pretty good. You can see them, they don't like the light. But you can also see that there's some red flashes in there, which tells you that their color is good and that they're relatively happy. Until I turn the light on. So what I'm going to do is, they've been together for about 24 hours. I'm going to go ahead and put some vinegar, one container full of vinegar eels in, and let that drift down to under the grating there for about 5 minutes, and then do a water change as we've been doing before, bringing it up to here and then bringing it back down again. Okay, this is day 7. Water's clear, looks good. I fed them a little bit of dry food earlier, just a sprinkling of some the flake here. The energy's good, the color's good. They still don't like the light. So what I'm going to do is give them a dose of vinegar eels. I'll get 2 containers worth of vinegar eels this morning. And we'll start on a regular path toward assuming that there's going to be some fry in here. So these are the vinegar eels. This is what happens when you've got 2 and 3 batches of Odessas going at a time. I'll go through 3 bottles at a feeding and doing 2 to 3 feedings a day. So if I've got 2 cultures going, this is actually a minimum number of bottles that are needed. And you want it so that when you start at the, say, the right, and work your way all the way to the left, when you get back to the right again, the vinegar eels have populated back up enough that you're ready for another harvest. The way I harvest them here is simply by using 2 coffee filters and a plastic container with the bottom cut out of it. Drains into this. This is taken out, put into aquarium water here, and then it's fed to the fish. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go through and pull all of them, and take a look and see if we have any females that have dropped their eggs, or any left, or any that have not dropped their eggs, and decide whether or not to continue with them breeding in here or to put them back in with the rest of the adults. So these are the 6 females, and you can see that there appears to be like 2 of them that may not have dropped their eggs. The others seem to be thinned down. So I think this is probably a good spawn. We'll have to see. We won't know for about 2 weeks. The tank, meanwhile, because the eggs are semi-adhesive, I leave everything in the tank until we know all the eggs are hatched, which will be 2 to 3 days. So generally around the 3rd day I'll start pulling this apart, and we'll see where we're at with respect to fry and that sort of thing. But at this point I'm going to go ahead now. It's the afternoon of the 7th day. I'm going to do a paramecium feeding right now, and then we'll do a vinegar eels tonight. Each one of these will be followed with a water change by filling the water up to that yellow strip on the far right, and then draining it back down to the yellow strip just below it. We'll also leave the light on 24/7. That's best for the plants, and also it'll help keep the water quality up. And it also will force the fry to be awake 24/7, more or less, so that they can eat around the clock and grow hopefully at their maximum rate.